Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is John Peterson. I'm the Executive Director of Coastal Housing Partnership, and want to welcome you to today's webinar for Real Estate Agent Panel and Preparing to Buy. So we have a great presenters with us, and I will introduce them shortly. I just want to go over a few housekeeping items, and we have more people joining. Um, so today's webinar, this will be the screen that you see. You won't see your own faces, or you'll be on mute as the attendees. But we welcome your questions. We're going to use the question and answer section. So the chat section will not be monitored, but I'll be monitoring the question and answer section. We may answer your questions as they come up, but please write them in there. If we don't have time to answer them on the webinar, we will certainly respond to you in writing. But hopefully, and our plan is that we'll get through these. We'll answer the questions as appropriate or answer them at the end for all of you. So please feel free to enter those questions whenever you have them, and I'll bring them to the presenters. And so with that, I would like to introduce today's panelists. We have Katie Spieler with Berkshire Hathaway and Jill Agonius with Village Properties. Both of them come with several years of experience and excitement to work with our Coastal Housing Partnership employees and member employees with the organization. So if you want more information or a refresher on your benefits, please visit our website or reach out to me and our Coastal Housing Partnership team. But then Katie and Jill are available. Their information is on the screen, and you're welcome to reach out to them for any follow-up questions or if you need any help with looking to buy a home. And so with that, I will jump into our questions and our discussion with our panelists. But just as a reminder, please enter your questions in the question and answer section as we go, and we will try to get all of your questions and concerns met. So let's talk about how to approach the home buying process. And we'll start with Jill. So Jill, what would you say to someone should do to prepare themselves for their first home purchase or a home purchase?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Jill Agonius. Super excited to be here. Thanks for having us, John. So other than, I think, emotionally preparing for the home buying process, finances are really the biggest factor in purchasing a home because, of course, if you're not set up financially, then there is that barrier to actually purchasing a home. So it's never too early to talk to a mortgage broker. And throughout this webinar, a mortgage broker is synonymous with a lender, even though they're slightly different. But for the purpose of this, you'll hear us talk about mortgage brokers and lenders as if they're the same thing. And a mortgage broker can help you evaluate your finances and give you tangible goals to reach your purchasing power that you need to buy the home that you want. So I always encourage people to talk to a mortgage broker, even if you're like 5 years down the line. Some basic things that any mortgage broker will tell you is that one of the most important things is to keep your credit score up. I always like to say aim for 760 plus, and just note that if there are multiple people that are going to be on your loan, then the lender takes the lowest score, not the average. Other points are to increase your income and plan to stay in your current role for at least 2 years before applying for a loan. You don't necessarily need to stay at the employer, but just make sure that you keep the same role. Along with increasing your income, try to keep your debt to income ratio low. So aim for spending about less than like 35% of your income. And then the last thing on the financial front is saving for the down payment. So yes, it is possible to get a mortgage with less than 20% down. However, if you're planning on buying a home in Santa Barbara where the loans are typically bigger, we call them jumbo loans, then it's always great to aim for 20% of the purchase. If you do go for the less than 20% route, just know that you'll have more restrictions and probably some higher rates. And then other than setting up your finances, It's always fun, in my opinion, fun to keep an eye on the local market and all of our trends. And just how it's never too early to talk to a mortgage broker, it's also never too early to find a realtor.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. And I'll mention we have several mortgage brokers and lenders who are also a part of the Coastal Housing Partnership, which you can find on our list of network providers. Um, Jill, is it important that the realtor and lender know each other, or how do
It's
you find that?
definitely Yeah, it's definitely helpful. I always say that we create a team of three, right? It's the buyer, the realtor, and the lender. Although it's not totally necessary. And for your lender, at least in our market, most sellers and listing agents prefer to work with someone local. So keeping that in mind as well.
And great. And so some of those factors that you talked about, they can be kind of brought together by the mortgage broker in a loan pre-approval or a loan approval process. Tell us about that or what that is.
Yeah, so getting pre-approved for a loan essentially means that you're going to a mortgage broker or a lender, giving them all of your information, and they're verifying things like your income, your employment, your credit score. And then once all of that is approved, they essentially give you a letter that says that you are financially equipped to buy a house. And oh, did we lose John? Just keep going. And so in our market in Santa Barbara, and I'm sure in a lot of other like sellers markets, getting pre-approved for a mortgage is like, I don't know, Katie, what would you say that it's absolutely essential when writing an offer?
And like Jill said, it's so essential to get that pre-approval started early because it is a lot of paperwork and the lender's checking all of your documents. So very important.
It is a process for sure. And having that pre-approval essentially tells the seller that you are financially equipped to buy that house. So, like for example, if there's a multiple offer situation and one person is not pre-approved and then one person is, but the offer is like pretty much the same, the seller is likely going to go with the offer that has the pre-approval because it's safer. Did we lose John? Is he gone?
I think we did.
That's okay. Katie, I'll ask you your next question.
Okay, great.
So, we talked about it's never too early to find a realtor. What should someone look for in a real estate agent?
Yeah, so it's really important to find a real estate agent that you trust and who you feel that they're going to put your best interests first. For most people, buying a home is your biggest financial purchase of your lifetime. So you want someone who is taking that into account and who is really looking out for what's best for you and not just trying to sell you a house. So it's also important to have an agent who knows the inventory. So they're out looking at property all the time. There's so many new listings coming on that they should be out seeing everything, no matter if they have a buyer currently for the property, just for their own knowledge. So someone who has a great background in the area. It's also very important to work with someone who's a full-time agent so that all of their time and effort are directed at helping you.
Thank you. Thanks for keep going. Sorry about that. I lost the internet. Okay. So where are you
So
guys?
Jill took it over. I
Great.
just went over what should you look for in a real estate agent?
Great. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. Um, so then, okay, so Jill, coming back to you, some of us may have heard uh, some of us may have heard about the NAR settlement. Some of us may or may not know what that is. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that's impacted the buying process?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's really multi-layered, but there are two biggest things that have come out of the NAR settlement. And especially for buyers, this is really important. Now, buyers must sign a written, what we call a buyer representation agreement, with their agent before viewing properties. And I actually love this change because it just very transparently solidifies what the agent's compensation will be and the terms of the relationship between the buyer and the real estate agent. The second thing that has come out of it that's really important for everyone to know is that compensation for the buyer's agent is now negotiated during the offer process instead of it being what was previously essentially set in stone from the beginning. And one of the fears that people had about the NAR settlement was that sellers were not going to continue to contribute to the buyer's agent's commissions. But so far in Santa Barbara, we actually haven't seen that big of a change on who's contributing to the buyer's agent compensation. So I think most sellers really recognize the importance of buyers having qualified licensed representation. So that's a good thing. And in my opinion, the NAR settlement just has led to more transparency and overall is a positive shift in our industry.
And so what it's getting at is commissions. Can you tell me about the commissions, how those get negotiated? Are those set amounts? How are they paid then in reality or now with the new settlement?
Yeah, good question. So when a buyer and an agent meet, they are then able to negotiate what that compensation will be between the buyer and the agent, right? And then when submitting an offer, the compensation is again discussed, and it can either be according to what the buyer representation agreement says, or it could be part of the buyer's negotiation strategy to actually pay for some of their agent's fees. As far as it being how it's paid, just so you know, everything in a transaction will always go through escrow. Please never send money to your agent directly. But it really depends. So like if the buyer ends up paying for some of the buyer's agent's compensation, they might be able to do it through the loan, or it might be through the closing costs. So again, it just depends on the situation. But again, for the most part in Santa Barbara, we're still seeing the sellers contributing to the buyer's agent's commission, and all of that is done through escrow.
And so I'm going to ask this question from an attendee because it's appropriate for this. They say, which is the better approach to finding a home and talking about commissions too? Is it working directly with the listing agent or hiring a buyer's agent?
That's a really great question. Katie, do you want to take this one?
Sure, yeah. We actually had that situation come up recently as the listing agent, and we really feel like it's important for buyers to have their own representation because when you're working with buyers and sellers, they have different goals. So the seller wants to get the most net proceeds out of that sale typically, and the buyer wants to get the house that they love for the least amount that they can pay for it. So we always want to have representation for both of those parties separately. To us, that just makes sure that you are representing your side to your best ability.
Is it possible for the listing agent to represent both?
It is possible. Some agents do it and some do not. Some agents work on a team. So if they work on a team, they can sometimes divide and obviously not share any of the details. And that makes it a little bit easier, but it is legal.
Yeah, and so as I understand it, so they would need to be a dual agent, which has certain disclosures, and kind of what you're getting to would limit their ability to provide you with support and feedback and guidance because of the limitations of a dual agent. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Great. So now we know, we found our agent and we know how they're being paid. What are some of your suggestions, Katie, on how we find our perfect home?
Yeah, so there's obviously a lot of ways to find homes on the internet. A lot of people look to Zillow, but it's really important to call a realtor who has seen the home in person and knows about the home, the history of the home, about the area. There's a lot more than just what's posted on Zillow. Another option is if you are working with an agent, they can set you up on an auto email through the multiple listing service. And this is also going to send you coming soon listings that are not going to show up on Zillow until they actually hit the market. An agent will also have a lot of pocket listings, which are office exclusive listings. And those are usually announced at their office meetings or sent via email to agents only in that office, so they can share those with you. You can also find a house, obviously, by going to open houses. And we always like to stress the importance of going to open houses. As Jill mentioned, even if you're, not going to buy a home soon, you can get to know the market. So it's crucial to go see those houses in person. And then you can follow what they end up closing for. And that's just going to make sure you have that knowledge of your price range and what things are closing for. Another option is that if you're working with an agent and you like a specific neighborhood, they can send out a letter to every house in that neighborhood and say, we have a really well qualified buyer who loves your neighborhood. Let us know if you're buying. So a ton of different options and a lot of different ways to find a home.
May I add something too? To Katie's point about dual agency before, if you're going straight to the listing agent, then you are essentially looking for a home by yourself. Whereas if you have a buyer's agent, all of the things that Katie mentioned, or most of them, are really things that the buyer's agent is putting like a lot of effort and work on for you to find the best home. So yeah.
Yeah, and so Katie, when we've looked at those homes and we want to make an offer, is that something we can just do, or what does that process look like? And is it easier when you have a buyer's agent?
Yeah, so it's really helpful to have that guidance from an agent. And as Jill mentioned earlier, there's a lot goes in even before you make that offer. So when you're starting to look at making an offer, you've hopefully been following the market, looking at what things are closing for so that you can come up with that number, the purchase price with your agent, and you have a good feel that that's really what the home is worth to you. And you know that down the line, the resale value will be there. So all that pre-offer research and all of your knowledge finding is really important. And then when you are writing the offer or with your agent, it's important for you as the buyer to understand the contract. So usually sitting down with your agent, even before you find a house that you like, and just going through the purchase agreement line by line is really important, so that when the right house comes up, you feel comfortable on signing and knowing everything you're signing for. And before you make the offer, it's also really important to read all the reports on the house, because that's going to give you a lot of information on what's needed. If the house has anything that's needing improvements, you can have that all for your offer, so that you can not only come up with the offer price, but also timeframes for contingencies. So there's usually, people like to have a physical inspection contingency, so that maybe they have 7 days or 10 days to look at the house and to get contractors in to give them some quotes on things that might need upgrading. So that you have all of that time to gather information and make sure that you want to move forward in the escrow. So you're going to come up with the offer price, a close of escrow time frame, timeframes for contingencies, and then you would sign the contract with your agent. So you can either sign that in person, or a lot of agents use DocuSign. And then that agent is going to take your pre-qualification letter and your proof of the down payment, and they're going to submit that with the offer to the listing agent.
Great. So we kind of got into the escrow there a little bit. I think, one of the big things we think about, a buyer might think about, Jill, is really the price, right? And so it's important to learn about all of these other steps, which is what we want to talk about too. But you talked about kind of understanding your market. Is the listing price the hard and fast? Is that the only thing, or how do we approach that?
Yeah, great question. I always like to say that the listing price is just a starting point. One thing that your agent should help you do is analyze the sales prices of comparable properties. So properties that are around the general vicinity, that have about the same square footage, about the same number of bathrooms and bedrooms, and around the same quality as the home that you're looking at. And then from there, you have to look at the home itself, right? So assess the home's condition. Is it a fixer? Does it need a little bit more work? Are there repairs that still need to be done? And then additionally, looking at like the general market trends. So right now, for example, we're in a seller's market, which means that the sellers have a little bit more of an upper hand, and it's a bit more competitive for buyers right now. And each property is going to be different, right? Like one property is in a really ideal neighborhood and might get 9 offers in the first week or something like that, right? Then you have to adjust what your strategy is going to be like for that property. But then there might be another property, maybe just 2 miles down the road, that's different condition and that has no offers and has been on the market for like 180 days, right? So those approaches will be different. Another thing that is really important to remember, and this is what an agent can help you with, is considering what the seller's situation is like and adjusting your offer accordingly. So like, for example, if the seller still lives there and the listing agent says that the sellers need more time to move out, then perhaps part of your offer can be a lease back. So, which essentially means that the seller can stay in the home for X amount of days after closing. So there are certain terms that can make your offer more enticing. It's not just the price that is the main determining factor of whether or not a seller chooses your offer. And lastly, and I think that this is really important, stick to your budget, know what your budget is, and when you're in the process of making an offer and then potentially getting a counter offer, it's really easy to let your emotions kind of go crazy. So try to stick to your guns and keep your emotions in check so that if your offer is accepted, you feel really, really good about it and don't have buyer's remorse.
So just to question kind of on the verbiage you're using or the way you're describing this, do I, as the buyer, need to go and compare the different properties to come up with my price? And am I telling them and responding to the counter offers?
Yeah, so if you have an agent, then they would do a lot of that legwork for you. Ultimately, though, the amount that you offer is going to be up to you. Your agent is there to just give you the information you need to make an educated decision.
But I'm just going to be talking to you as my agent, not to the seller.
Exactly. Don't talk to the seller. You usually don't talk to the seller, then you usually don't talk to the listing agent.
Yeah. Good. Okay, I just want to remind everybody to put your questions in the question and answer section. We have a couple good questions that we will get to here shortly. I just want to go back to Katie. You started to talk about this in terms of in making the offer and some of the details that you need to think about that you put in the offer. So at this point, we've made an offer. It's been accepted. Now we're in escrow. Can you tell us about escrow and what that looks like and how some of those factors play out?
Yeah, so once you start at or enter into escrow, your time frame for your contingencies starts. So if you've written in a 10-day contingency for home inspection, right away, once escrow starts, you have 10 days from that day that you entered escrow to get your home inspections done. And then on that 10th day, that contingency would be removed and you're that much closer to closing. So once escrow starts, the first, week or 2 weeks, there's a lot of fact finding. You're going to want to bring in anyone who you want to inspect the property. So you might want to have a foundation specialist, a roofer come and check out the roof life and longevity. Anything that you want to get checked out, you're going to want to get those going. So that's kind of the big thing there. And then there's going to be a lot of paperwork that is in escrow that will probably need to be explained to you because you'll be signing a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of disclosures. So we mostly use DocuSign for those, but if there's anything that is confusing, we often, walk through the buyer those documents and disclosures. And then the deposit, which is 3% of the purchase price, is due into escrow within 3 days. And that's essentially cash. So you need to have that amount wired into escrow, or you would drop off a cashier's check. And then you'll also receive an escrow timeline. So that's going to just give you all of the deadlines of those contingencies and all of the dates that are important to stay on top of. And so your agent will be communicating to you and making sure that you stick to that timeline.
And so who is getting those? This is a question from one of the attendees. Who is finding those inspectors, or do I need to do that before I start looking for the homes, or how do we get the inspectors there in that short time window?
Yeah, so that's a great actually question going back to when you are looking for a realtor and when you're interviewing a realtor is to say, do you have trusted industry service providers that you use a lot? So usually your agent has people that they've worked with in the past that they have who can come out on a calls notice. As agents, we often work with these people a lot day to day. And so we have a relationship with them. And if, we say that we need someone out there in 2 days, they'll get someone out there and then they're really trusted. So when you're on the buying side, you want to make sure these people are very thorough and they are doing a job of, looking out for your best interests. So that's why it's really important to have someone who's trusted. And not just someone you find randomly to come in and give you, an opinion on the foundation of a house, which could cost, $60,000 to redo a foundation. So usually those are coming from referrals from your agent, and your agent can also make those calls for you. And often it's really helpful for your agent and as well as yourself to meet those people at the property. Just so that the agent can hear everything that they find and you can as well. Because if you find something that you weren't aware of, you can always ask for a credit in that escrow timeframe on the purchase price.
So Katie or Jill, if you want to jump in on that. So when I make an offer and I settle on a price and we do the counters, is that the final, that's done and set, or what are you saying about the credits?
Jill, I'll just speak really quickly on it and then I'll leave it to you. But it's not set in stone until you clear all those contingencies. So if you do find something that you are unaware of, you can ask for a credit to repair whatever you find. And then obviously the seller has, will need to decide if they want to honor that.
Yeah, and a credit is essentially a deduction from your closing costs. So it really is helpful to reduce the amount of cash that you're giving at closing. You could also ask for a price reduction as well, though I think especially for people who are getting mortgages, credits are usually more, yeah, we see credits a little bit more.
Yeah. All right. So I was curious to get the feedback of you, the two of you, from your experience. And maybe there's some ideas we have out there, or some scary thoughts, or some other myths that people might have heard or kind of come to believe. So, Jill, what would you say? We'll get both of your input, but Jill, what would you say are your top, so maybe 3 myths that you hear from buyers out there?
Yeah, I think a lot of buyers think that the only upfront cost is the down payment, but it's really important to also remember that there are lender fees, there's title insurance, there's appraisal fees, inspection fees, escrow fees. So it really ranges, but usually you can expect to, add an additional couple percents on top of that for your closing costs. So just be aware of that you'll need a little bit more than just the down payment. One other one that I hear a lot is, and I'm actually guilty of this one, never buy the biggest or the best house on the street. And there is kind of a little bit of truth to this. The reason why people say this is because usually the nicest home on the street may appreciate slower than the others. And while that could be the case, personally, I say buy what you love and what fits your lifestyle, right? This is your purchase. There is no hard and fast rule on this. My last one is that the myth is renting is always throwing away money. And it's very nice to buy a house because obviously you gain equity and appreciation from it, and it's just a really nice asset to have. And it's a really good investment. But I think that renting isn't always necessarily wasteful. I think that renting offers flexibility. You don't have to worry about maintenance responsibilities. There are no property taxes. So just depending on your lifestyle and your financial situation, renting isn't a bad option. And I know as a real estate agent, like I probably shouldn't say that, but I think it's the truth in some scenarios for sure.
We appreciate your transparency and honesty. So, Katie, what about you? Do you have some other myths that you've heard a lot of that you?
Yeah, not so much a myth, but something we've just seen through our years of doing this. And the most fun part of our jobs is looking at homes. And that's why we really encourage buyers to get out and look at everything. And it's also, we've seen it. If we tell buyers, look at everything in your price range, it's amazing to see. A lot of buyers end up buying a home in a different area of town or a different size home than they thought they wanted. So it's really important to look at everything that you can and also have your agent looking broader than your specific interests. Santa Barbara, especially, is so unique and it has a lot of hidden cool neighborhoods that maybe you didn't think of. So just getting out and looking at everything, as long as it's in your price range, is really important. And even if it's a little bit over your price range, like Jill said, sometimes a house is sitting on the market for 180 days and it was just priced too high. So it's important to look at maybe a little bit above your price range, a little bit below, and all of the different areas of town, because you just never know what you will fall in love with. So we've seen it time and time again, and it's always fun to see buyers surprised at what they end up with.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Well, I have several great questions here, so I want to get to some of those from our attendees. So we'll kind of, I'll throw this to one of you, but please jump in if you want to answer it. The first one, Jill, since the question is, since the interest, I believe interest rates are so high right now, I don't want that to stop me from buying, but I've heard there is a cost to refinancing. What are the pros and cons of refinancing a home or condo?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is a cost to refinancing, but it really depends on who the bank is that you're getting the new loan from. So essentially, refinancing is like applying for a whole other loan. So keeping that in mind, and at the beginning of this webinar, we talked about all the things you need to have in order to get a mortgage in the first place, and those things still exist for refinancing your home. The cost is usually somewhere between 0.5% and 1% of the total loan amount, not the purchase price, the total loan amount. And refinancing can be really advantageous, especially if the interest rates end up dropping significantly. Or, for example, I'm having a client do this right now. She has a lower credit score, which unfortunately gives her a higher interest rate. So her plan, because she wants to buy now instead of later, is to get her credit score up. And then once it's up to that 760 range, she's going to refinance at that point. And ultimately, because she's planning on being in the home for a longer amount of time, the amount of money that she'll be spending overall with her refinance loan will be much, much lower in the long term.
Katie, here's just a couple questions that go together. When I'm getting pre-approved, what's the best way to do that? Should I use multiple lenders? That's part one. Part two is, do I need to get a pre-approval letter for each home that I'm making an offer on? Even if there are different prices, specific prices within my loan range. And then last part of that is, are there advantages to the USAA for veterans?
Okay, so as an agent, they'll usually send you a couple of different lenders. So it is really important to reach out to, 1 to 3 lenders and just talk with them, see, if there's someone you prefer. It's always good to talk to a couple of them. And then you can get all of your information into multiple lenders. It does take quite a bit of time, but it's pretty much the same information that every lender will ask for. So if you're getting your information into one lender, it's a little bit easier to do that to a second lender. And they do have different interest rates that they'll give you. So we always advise, going to multiple lenders and just seeing the best rate that you can get and the best terms. So that is important. And then as far as the pre-qualification letter, we like to have buyers get an individual letter for every property. But once you get all of your information into the lender, it's really easy for them to change your pre-qualification letter to a different address and to a different amount. So it's very important also to make sure that your pre-qual letter matches your purchase price. So you wouldn't want your pre-qual letter to say that you're pre-qualified up to 1.5 if you're putting in an offer for 1.3. So you just always want it to match so that it shows that the offer that you're putting in is your best offer, and it shows that to the listing agent on that side. And then as far as the veterans loans, it's very advantageous if you do qualify for that. You can get a lower interest rate for those loans. And so any lender or most lenders will know how to deal with the veterans loans. And so that's why it's also important to maybe ask multiple lenders and work with multiple lenders at first, just to gauge their knowledge of working with the veterans loans and what they can do for you.
And I'll just put a plug in here to our attendees, just a reminder that Coastal Housing Partnership is a part of your benefit. Lenders are included, and that includes home buying, refinancing, We also offer webinars where you can go on our website to see past webinars with lenders. And we have a home buying fair that will be coming up in April that will have agents and realtor and lenders at. And so, really we're here as a resource for you to be fully prepared for your home buying process. So Jill and Katie are giving you some great information and thoughts on this, but it's also, I think they would agree, when you get down to it with the financing piece, you really want to talk to a lender as well, and use their expertise and use our wonderful agents for your home finding process and your offer and walking you through the whole procedure. I think you kind of talked about this, Jill. The question is, how early should we start the pre-approval process? Never too early?
Yeah, I think the pre-approval process is a little bit different than just exploring what your options are. I think it's never too early to call a lender and give them your current situation and see where you're at right now. As far as actually starting the more traditional pre-approval process, usually a pre-approval is good for 90 days. You can always, re-up that after the 90 days or like renew it, but generally a pre-approval is good for 90 days. So keeping that timeline in mind. And Katie mentioned pre-qualification. So there are actually 3 levels of pre-approval for a mortgage. The bottom level is pre-qualification, where you essentially just talk to a lender, give them your information, and then they can generally say like, yes, based on the general information that this buyer gave me, I think that they would qualify. So that's the lowest level of pre-approval. The second level is going to actually get pre-approved, where you send in a lot of your documentation, and then you get that official letter that says this person is pre-approved for X amount. Sometimes what I also like to do is ask the lender to call the listing agent just to like verify, like, yes, they have a strong financial profile. And then the next level above that is fully underwritten pre-approval, which is just a whole other like deeper layer. And that in some sellers' minds is almost as good as cash. So if you are in a competitive market and if you're making an offer on a very competitive property, that is going to enhance your offer a lot. But going back to the original question, never too early to just generally talk to a lender. And then you can start the pre-approval process when you're feeling like you're ready to actually buy a house.
I think going back to a question you started to answer, Katie, but maybe just expanding on it a little bit. When we're talking about finding a real estate agent, are there some good things we should do as far as, do we interview agents, or what are some good questions? Do I just find the person who's first on the independent, or what kind of, should I get along with this person? Do I have to talk with them ever?
Yeah, you're going to be working with them a lot. So it's really important to talk with them, preferably in person, just to, gauge if you guys feel like you'll have a good relationship, if you trust them, if you think like they'll be a great person who is going to keep your best interests at heart. But some good initial questions, especially for all of you, are: do you know what the Coastal Housing Partnership is? Have you worked with Coastal Housing Partnership? Again, we've talked about this, but do you know lenders who you would recommend who also are part of Coastal Housing Partnership? And then, do you have trusted industry service providers? That's really important, that someone knows like all the ins and outs of property, that works with a lot of contractors, painters, electricians. They'll have those relationships and they'll help you get through all of those inspections easier. And you can also ask, how long have you been working in real estate? What's your background in real estate in this area? And also, if you just want to see how they handle the process, you can ask them, how can you describe the process of buying, or can you describe the process of selling, and see if they're thorough and going through all of the steps, because there is a lot of steps, and you will be working with them a lot, talking with them, having to sign a lot of paperwork. So I think really important to try to meet them in person and just have them walk you through their process.
Great. There's a question here that is pretty specific. So I don't know if either of you have worked with these. The question is about 1031 exchanges. And the question, I'm not quite sure, maybe this attendee could add more. Maybe just, it says 1031 exchanges from a $200,000 to $1.2 million house. So maybe do either of you have some sort of a summary of what a 1031 exchange is? I think this is definitely a good question to have with a individual realtor on a specific case, but just since there's a question, Jill, do you or either of you want to jump in on kind of what that is?
Sure. So a 1031 exchange is essentially you have to have it's for an investment property it's for an investor to buy their next investment property. So for a 1031 exchange, you usually have to hold the property for at least 2 years. And then after that, you can buy your next investment property. It has to be an investment property. It cannot be a primary residence. And the exchange essentially it helps with your capital gains taxes. So instead of when you sell your house, instead of paying X amount on capital gains, you actually transfer or exchange that into your next property. So it helps to save you a lot of money. I don't know what the 200K house to $1.2 million house means, but I assume I think this person had an additional question above that about lending. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And so if you were to go from a 200K house to a $1.2 million house, you would have to, of course, cover the difference either through cash or through getting a loan.
And then another question here, and we still have a few more minutes. If you have other questions, please feel free to put them in the question and answer section. But Katie, do you have any advice for someone of an older age looking to purchase a home? Or maybe any different advice that you would give to anybody at different phases in life?
Yeah, I think that, like Jill mentioned, it's really important to have a good credit score and to have savings. So I think any point of life that you are in, it's important to have a job that you've held for 2 years or longer. So just getting all those ducks in a row. And then there are some housing areas in town that are 55 years or older. So those are opportunities to, look at those homes if you are over 55, and they're more of like communities. So there's different areas as far as that, age requirements. But I think it's just important, any age you're at, you can buy a house. You just have to get started early. It's very, there's a lot of detail that goes into it. So having good people that you trust working with is important. And then making sure that you feel like you want to be in that spot for 5+ years is also really beneficial. Is something that we like to stress with our buyers, because Santa Barbara is a super strong market, and it seems like we've been in a seller's market for a really long time. But you want to make sure that you buy a house that you love and you see living in long term, just because you never know what's going to happen with the market. And if you do move, you can always rent that spot out. But again, for rentability, you want that house to be somewhere that you like, that's a good area. So it's important to keep in mind all of those factors as far as, not just what you're looking for right now, but what you're looking for in the next 5 years, because it is a big financial decision to buy a house.
Great. Thanks so much. Getting some good questions here. We'll try to get them quickly. before we run out of time, but again, we'll have the answers, send them out to you if we have your email. But are there additional thoughts to look for in recently built homes, Jill? Specific questions you would ask in that scenario?
Yeah, I'm gonna throw out another myth. And I think some people think that when you buy, say, a brand new home, you don't need an inspection. And I will say that you should always get an inspection, regardless of whether or not a home was built 100 years ago or whether it was just built. Um, yeah, one of the things that I actually love about newer builds is that they're going to be more up to code. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to get insurance on newer homes just because if you think about like the roof is brand new. Um, Maybe it's a little bit more fire resistant, which is a big topic nowadays. But as far as looking at recently built properties, honestly, I think it's almost the same as looking at a 100-year-old property. You should do the same due diligence.
Mhm. Well, great. Let's see. Katie, can I rent out my primary residence if I still have an active mortgage on it?
Yes, you can definitely rent out your primary residence if you have a mortgage on it. So, sometimes people want to buy something else, but they do want to hold on to their house. And obviously, that would make it become their secondary residence. But you can always rent out your property as long as there's no rules against renting out your property, which sometimes you'll find in HOAs for condos. So you always want to make sure if you are looking at buying a condo and you potentially want to rent it in the future, to make sure you check the HOA with HOA. You'll get all the HOA documents, the meeting minutes for the past year, and you can have your agent look into make sure that it's rentable. Sometimes condos have percentages that they want to keep it to be owner occupied. So sometimes they'll say 80% of the units need to be owner occupied. And you can have your agent check to see what that percentage is at to make sure that is viable in the future.
Great. Well, there's a couple, I'm going to encourage the attendees. There's some questions about second homes and again, the 1031 exchange conversation and apartment buildings. I'm going to suggest you reach out as those are kind of specific, maybe to one of these presenters, and they would be happy to talk to you about that, I'm sure. But I want to thank all of you for your attendance today and for participating. And I want to thank Jill and Katie for their expertise and their time. And please feel free to reach out to them with any questions or check out the Coastal Housing Partnership website for a list of all of our network partners. Thank you so much again for your time. We will be sending out a recording of this as well to all of you and for all the registers. Do you have any final comments or thoughts, Katie?
No, just good job attending and getting all this information. That's totally the most important step, is just starting and getting out there. So thanks for having me. And the Coastal Housing Partnership is amazing. So I'm glad you're part of it, and just definitely take advantage of all that it offers because it's a great local resource.
How about you, Jill?
I echo exactly what Katie was just saying. Like, use the Coastal Housing Partnership as much as possible. Go through those old webinars, ask a bunch of questions, and again, it's never too early to start, even if you feel like your home buying journey is 10, 15 years down the line.
Great. Well, thanks again to you both, and I hope that you all have a great Thursday, and good luck in your home buying process.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
everybody.